Hey, everybody. So, as an introduction to our next unit, Poetry and History, I want to go over some of the key elements of poetry that we'll be using to explore poems throughout certain important periods in history. So, to get started, let's take a look at what we're going to look at today. So, first, we're going to ask, what is a poem? Then, we're going to take a look at imagery, figurative language, symbolism, and rhythm in order to better understand how these elements can help us understand what was going on in history at the time the poems were written or are reflecting on. And then finally, we're going to take a preview of poetry and history and understand why all of these things matter. So let's get started. So, what is poetry? Well, poetry is a form of artistic expression that uses rhythm and metaphorical language to bring to mind emotions and express ideas. And what does poetry do? It creates vivid images with words to helps us experience and understand the world around us. It also uses how words sound and how they fit together in order to help us feel the physical movement and how that connects to our emotions. And poetry also uses specific words to make us feel a certain way or understand a specific idea. And to put it another way, the poet Joseph Brodsky said, "Poetry is essentially the soul's search for its release in language." Poetry is kind of what makes us human. Let's start by looking at imagery. So, imagery is a descriptive language that appeals to the five senses: taste, touch, smell, sound, and sight. Simply, what that means is that when poets use imagery in their poems, they say what's seen and they let the picture they create speak for itself. And one way they can do this is by painting a picture with words. For example, one of the poems we're going to look at is The Caged Bird by Maya Angelou, and she uses this image. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. Think about the images that are in that section right there. We have the free bird who is thinking of not just the first breeze, but another one, and how that might carry them through the trade winds. They're soft, the trees are sighing, and the fat worms, they're waiting on a dawn bright lawn. So we know that it's morning, and we know that those worms are fat, waiting for the bird to feast on them. And then at the end, he names the sky his own. The bird understands that the sky and him are connected. So that image right there gives us the idea that a free bird is free to choose what they want to do, where they want to go, what they want to eat, what time of day they actually want to do those things. Now, on the other hand, some poets use sensory details to create vivid images in the reader's mind. From Huelga by Diana Garcia, she writes, "More than dry eyes and drier throats, the heat rises, pushes against your face, singles you out atop that truck." Now, in this poem, we understand that someone is singled out, right? They're at the top of that truck, they're all alone. They're somewhere that's hot, and they're either crying, dry eyes, or it's so hot and so dry that they're both dry eyed and thirsty, right? So, understanding the idea that these two images can create what we understand, what we feel, and what we think. Let's move on to figurative language. Now, figurative language expresses meanings that go beyond the literal definition of the words, that gives readers new ideas and new insights. Let's look at two literary devices, metaphor and simile. Those are two types of figurative language. Similes compare two things using the word like or as. In Natasha Trethewey's history lesson, she writes, "Minnows dart at my feet, glinting like switchblades." Now, are the fish actually knives? No. But what she's implying here is that the minnows are going in and around her feet, just like the bright flashes of a switchblade. She's turning something that's really not that dangerous into something that could be. Now, metaphors replace the word or name of one thing with that of another, and they compare them. For example, in This Is America by Childish Gambino, he compares the idea of a black man to a barcode or a dog kenneled in the backyard, implying that black men in America now aren't free. They're trapped in some way. This is how similes and metaphors can work in order to give us a better idea of what's going on in the poem, and also the themes and the mood and tone that we're expected to take the poem as. Now, similarly, symbolism is using an object or word to replace an abstract idea. Symbolism adds layers of meaning and it allows us as readers to interpret the poem in a way that's much deeper than what's written on the page. So, symbols in poems could be people or objects. For example, in Ross Gay's A Small Needful Fact, he's connecting the murder of Eric Garner, who gave activists the phrase, I can't breathe, to the fact that he worked in a community garden where plants he tended to provided oxygen back to the atmosphere, as a way of saying that his legacy isn't just his death, it's also the things that live because of him. In another poem, John McCrae's In Flanders Field, he uses a place to connect to the results of World War One. He connects the field of peaceful red poppies that grew on the battlefields after the war to the death and carnage that happened on those fields. The bright red poppies symbolizing the blood and death that occurred. Finally, let's look at rhythm. Rhythm is the heartbeat of a poem. It can express emotion through how words sound individually and how they sound together. Rhythm can create kind of musical qualities, like setting the pace and the tone of the poem. And some rhythm comes from repetition, like in Martin Espada's Alabanza in Praise of the Local 100. In that poem, he repeats the words Alabanza and its English translation praise to make the poem sound like a prayer for each of the 43 members of the kitchen and the hospitality staff who were at the top of the World Trade Center when the towers were hit. And some rhythm comes from how the words sound to go together or not, like in Billy Collins' The Names. He alphabetically lists the surnames of people who died on 9/11, and the repetition and movement through the alphabet from the name Ackerman to the name Zeminski, it helped us readers understand the total of the grief and loss. Now, why does this all matter? When we're thinking about poetry and history, these elements can help us understand things. See, poetry has a unique ability to capture the truth of historical events, emotions, and the changes happening in society. And understanding these specific elements of poetry, they're powerful tools for understanding and interpreting history. Well, first of all, they can help us feel what people felt at the time. Using imagery and symbolism help ties the emotions and feelings of a historical event to language that is universal that we can understand now. And then it helps us connect to the events of the past. Understandings in things like symbolism and figurative language, it helps us connect the struggles and triumphs from today to those of the past. And that's why this is important. So now that we have this understanding, let's explore some poetry and history. We're going to look at poems that use imagery, figurative language, symbolism, and rhythm to better understand some important moments in history. You'll have a chance to look at World War I, the United States Civil Rights Movement, the labor movement across the world, and in the aftermath of 9/11. All of these things have been explored by multiple poets in multiple generations. And I think if we take a look at how poetry and history connect, we'll have a better understanding of how poets and historians can work together